Okay, so in the last video we handled getting our form up to speed. We have this pretty decent looking form on the front end now that allows a user to post a new job. They can have an apply URL, a job type, location, say if it's remote, add a description, a company website, and a logo. So I haven't tested this out, but I'm assuming it's working. If it isn't, we'll find out. But I want to go one step further and add our Stripe form as well to this mix. So the thing about this Rails form is it's going to post only these fields, and the Stripe form is going to be different because it's going to a different host to basically push this information to Stripe rather than save it to our database. So we don't want to save this kind of information anyway, because you can imagine the kind of security implementations going on where you're trying to save a user's credit card, which would be a terrible idea. So all this is happening with one click to this form where we tell Stripe to do its thing and we tell Rails to do its thing, and then all these things we can pass in as parameters on the form that are hidden and get that data back that goes to and sends to Stripe. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully it will in a second, but that's what we're going to start working on now. In the last video, I was going to implement some JavaScript for this image file to appear once you actually add it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick. I actually have it already in a jobs.js file in our JavaScript directory. This is basically stuff I've used in the past few videos. It's set to CoffeeScript right now for some reason. Syntax, I can't spell, tax.js. There we go. And Rails prefers to use CoffeeScript, a library that actually JavaScript today got cues from, which is kind of neat, but I'm still on the struggle bus with JavaScript, so I'm just kind of using what I've found over the years. We have the file reader API we're getting for this image when we're adding it. There is a class being added here. I've added some kind of styling to go along with it. So when we add an image, it's looking for that job avatar class we added, which is right there. It's hard to see, sorry. But that's why we added that class, because we're looking for that. And then we're handling a file select on that element and then creating an image tag in real time that processes that data and shows it in the browser, as opposed to just seeing the file name as a typical file field represents. So with that done, that's kind of just one of the parts of the app that's just, it's useful, but not necessarily what I wanted to focus on. So we have this payment form we want to render out, and that's in a new partial. And I want to actually go ahead and fill that form out. It's going to be under payment underscore payment HTML. And in this is going to be some elements that relate to the Stripe elements library, which we're including in our application layout file. That's just kind of coming through the pipe from a third party, which is Stripe. But I'm going to add some stuff here and then I'll explain it the best I can. I guess I could start right away. This typical if statement here is going to be if a user didn't charge or purchase a job, then show the form. If they did and that stuff saved, say they have a card brand on file, which is what we added to our database in the beginning, then go ahead and not show that form, because we don't want the user to pay for the same job posting twice. You'll see what I mean when we get the views intact, but this is kind of what we're going for. That's kind of a way you can say if something was saved to the database, is using .persisted with a question mark. It's kind of nice. So we're going to add some basic markup around this form, but some of this stuff comes straight from Stripe. So I'd recommend definitely checking out the documentation. Even the JavaScript we need to use coming up is going to be from there. So we just kind of made it our own in this case. So I'm just going to add some stuff here. Okay, so in our view, we have these elements that are going to represent the actual Stripe form that comes through basically with JavaScript, and including the Stripe library. So combined with the Stripe gem and Stripe elements, which we're linking to in our application layout file at the very top, if you recall, we're able to push this stuff through, and then those elements display. We can also render errors if cards have errors and everything like that. So none of this is actually being submitted to our actual database. So that's great. But the things that are, which we've already supplied in the first right, is the user's card brand, their last 4 digits, their expiration month and year. And we check to see if the current user already has a Stripe ID, because if they have yet to make a purchase on the site using their ID, that wouldn't be there. Basically, there'd be nothing in the database yet. So if they do, I want to show them what previously used card they did use. So this is definitely useful for something if you're doing more of a subscription model. I just wanted to include it. For this type of app, it's overkill because you're just charging a one-time fee at the given point. So it's just kind of a point of sale thing. But that's just an idea of what you could do with it if you were to extend this. So with that done, our payment is included into our form now. We should hopefully see the new styles. Okay, so we still need a JavaScript to make this really work. So let's go back to our JavaScripts, and I'm going to create one called charges. And this will just get appended into our app. We don't have to worry about including it anywhere, which is the beautiful thing about the Rails asset pipeline. So we're going to kind of define things as we go. There's kind of a lot here. Hopefully I can talk you through it and make sense of it. Get going though. So document dot add event listener. We're not using jQuery, so I'm slowly but surely starting to learn the language here. But like I said, I'm not an expert in JavaScript. It's just kind of a very, I can't think of it now. It's late. It's a language that just kind of, it pisses me off. That's the best way to describe it, because you can do so many things in one way, and it's annoying to me. I like rigidness. So anyway, let me type this out and we'll try to go through it. So we're going to get that public key, which is going to be from that meta tag we added to our application file. So I'm going to do meta, and we can grab it with the query selector. It should be the selector, and we'll do meta with the name, which we gave it a name, and it's going to be called Stripe public key. And we need the square bracket there. And then we want to get the content of that. That's going to give us the key back, allow us to use it in this case. So we'll go to Stripe and make a variable there. I'm using ES6. You might stray away from this if you're gonna just use this in other older browsers. I'm just kind of supporting the modern stuff because I just prefer to. So you could just use var instead of const here if you want. So then we're passing through our Stripe library the public key, which is important because we need to do that to initialize everything. And then we can call elements and stripe.elements. This is what's going to be responsible for the elements library we're going to be using. And then what's kind of cool is you can style your form to look like your app if you really want to. So we can do some actual CSS in this case. And I'm just going to copy what I have here. So we set base object to color and 32325D. And you don't need to do semicolons. You do need commas here. Line height. With JavaScript, CSS properties are camel case. Just remember that. Font family. Helvetica new. Let's do with Helvetica sans serif, comma. Font smoothing. All this is optional. You can use what's default, but I'm just using what I ended up using. I can't spell anti. ALES. Font size 18 pixels. This is a string. You can set a placeholder property, which is interesting. And that can equate to this object, which is, we're just setting a color of A, B, 7, C4. And we'll go down to this one, add a comma, that's the base. And then if it's invalid, you can set styles too. So we'll do a color of FA7 FFA, and then icon color FA7 55A. Sorry, I said that wrong. And then we need a semicolon at the very end. Okay, so then we need to create our card. So do const card equals elements dot create card. You can pass in our styles, which is what we define right there. And we need to mount it. Oops. Our card dot mount, and then we'll mount it on that card element in our view, which is, I'll remind you, in our payment partial, this one right here, the ID. It's just kind of saying, hey, go put that there. And then we're going to add an event listener on the card, which is listening for any kind of change. And then we can do some cool ES6 stuff. We pass in the errors as an object and do a arrow function into some cool other stuff. So we can just do const display error equals document get element by ID, and then we'll get card errors, which is another div below the one we just wrote. Then we could check if there is an error, display the error, and give it the text content of the error message, which is just like, these are just a bunch of objects we're chaining into. So display error, text content is nothing. That's just if there isn't one. All right, and then we can go and finally make the form. And in this case, it's going to be called new job because Rails does that just kind of as a configuration by default. And I can prove that if you want to check it out on the front end. So basically, based on your model and the path, if it's RESTful, you can actually go ahead and assume this form is going to be job underscore new as the ID, or new underscore job as the ID, just kind of as a guess. So it's always underscored too in Rails. So we'll start there. We got that ID. We need to take the form, add an event listener of submit. And this can be async. This is kind of fancy stuff here, so if you're not following, that's quite all right. I'm having trouble myself, to be honest, understanding it, but this is the newer syntax, by the way, too. On Stripe's site, this is also just ES5 you can get, which has traditional functions and stuff. So we want to do pass in that event and then prevent the default. And this bit is a destructuring, I think. Const error equals await. So we're doing async await. So it's kind of saying okay, do this event and then await for this thing to happen. And then below, we'll start to kind of do the actual tasks. So it's kind of putting it on a queue, so to speak. Okay, so then we can check again for errors here. Kind of just going to copy this, but then change the things that happen. So we'll do inform the customer there was an error. And that's just going to be const error element. We're going to get that element. Equals document dot get element by ID again, and then card errors. Below that, we grab that error element and take the text content and make it error message. So within the error object, there is a message property, and that will contain whatever the error is. So that's kind of neat. And then else we'll do the Stripe token handler, which is a function we're going to create, and then pass in our token, which comes through Stripe when you do submit a form. So complicated, I know, but all of this is pretty cool in the end, and it's probably the quickest, easiest way to accept payments. So here's that function we're going to define. It's going to pass in a token, and we're going to just use the arrow function. And inside that, we're going to do the form again. And again, get the new job ID. And then const hidden input equals document. We're creating an element at this point, so create element input, and then hidden input is going to be, we're going to set some attributes on it, or attributes, however you want to say that. Type hidden, and hidden input, do the set attribute again, name, Stripe token, and continuing on, we're going to do one more, dot set attribute value, and it's going to be the token ID, which we are passing through. And then we're going to grab our form and append this element, the hidden input variable we created. And then going one step further, we created those parameters on our user, and I want to pass those through since this is where we're getting them from. We don't just have form fields on our Rails form for these. And last for, then we can do a for each since this is an array function, pass in a field, and then for the each field and token we can pass in. So for each of these we can loop through and then do our add field to form function, which is below. I'll add that in a second, but we're going to pass in the form as the getter, and then the token, and then the field, which is what we pass through here. So we're passing each of these through, and they're going to represent one of these in each iteration of this. So that is confusing as hell, I know, but hopefully it's starting to be maybe a little more clear. And then finally, we're going to do form submit. We can actually do that with JavaScript. So we'll do that. And then let's add that last function. So it's going to go outside of this token handler function, or whatever you want to call it. And then we'll create a new function there and add field to form, pass or have our parameters that we set. And then we'll do the hidden input thing again. So var, you can do var or const here, or whatever you want to do. I'm going to do const, I think. Hidden input. Create element. And then input, we can honestly just kind of do this. All right, no, let's just, hell, I'll just type it. Hidden input dot set attribute. Type is hidden again. So we're just following suit with this stripe token up here, but we're doing it with each of these, if that makes sense. That way we're able to pass it through to our Rails controller and actually submit this data to the database, which is what we want. This is how we hook into the front end and grab that stuff as parameters. So the fancy thing is, if you remember, these in our database don't actually have this. It's going to be a card in front of each, so we can actually just append that in our JavaScript as opposed to writing it. Up to you if you want to do that, but it's going to look like this. And then we'll just append it this way. Let's see if I did that right. Yeah, we need the bracket at the end there. And I'm going to make this double quotes instead of the singles, just for clarity. I don't know why, but I mix these, and it's a stupid habit. Like throughout, I'll do random 1 times, and then other places I'll do 2, and it drives me nuts, but I'm too lazy to go back and change it. Anyway, one more hidden input attribute is going to be value, of which will end up being token card field, which we did there. So then we append that to the form, hidden input, and that should do it for our JavaScript. So that's a lot, I know. Let me zoom out a little bit just to give some perspective. We're defining all the Stripe configured stuff here, and then setting some styles, creating in the card, mounting it to our div of card element, and then for each change we're actually saying if there are any errors. And then on the form, we're adding an event listener for it to submit. And then when it submits that data to Stripe, and we await for that to get a token back. And if a token comes back, great. If not, we get errors. And then we run this token handler, which will end up being how we actually submit these parameters through to our application and kind of tell our app what the hell is going on. So we get our Stripe token, and then on top of this token handler, we pass through some more data on the card. Obviously not the card number, but some, the brand, the expiration month, the year, the last 4 digits, just to provide the user some inclination of what the hell card they used. Then we call a function each time for those where we set each of these parameters as a parameter to get passed through to our controller. So in the next part, we'll go ahead and implement that in our controller, and I think this might make more sense as we go. So I will see you in the next part.